So now everybody is wondering or wanting to go the direction of a security token, which makes a lot of sense, if only because in the United States you're in a bit of a gray area. Are there such things as utility tokens? And a lot of ICO issuers are taking what you'd consider to be the safe route and saying, well, okay, we're just going to call it a security. And I've talked about Reg A and ICOs and security token offerings in the past and why those do and don't make sense. But the biggest issue is a secondary market, right? Any of the prevailing crypto exchanges, especially the ones in the United States, Binance, Bittrex, Coinbase, etc., aren't going to list for trading a security token. And the reason why they're not going to is that they're not licensed national securities exchanges. So to the extent that any of them did list a security token for trading, they could conceivably run afoul of the Exchange Act because they would be facilitating the exchange of securities without the proper licensure. So the question becomes, can one become a licensed national securities exchange? And that's difficult, right? That's difficult. There's only a few of them in the United States, and you've heard of them: NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, and so forth. So the question becomes, are there alternatives? And the primary, if not only alternative, is what's called an alternative trading system, or what's called a multilateral trading facility in Europe, or a call network, or a electronic communication network in different places. But the requirements to become an alternative trading system, which is exempt from the requirement that you become a licensed national securities exchange, is that you become a broker-dealer first, right? So typically in the traditional securities world, ATSs operate on sort of in the dark pool type market, where you have large institutional investors trading large blocks between other institutional investors. So, but that requires you to become a broker-dealer, and to become a licensed broker-dealer, you have to go through FINRA. Now, you can buy broker-dealers and obtain a licensure and operate and so on and so forth, but it's not an easy road to hoe, right? It's much more likely that you would be able to become an alternative trading system for crypto than you would a licensed national securities exchange, but it's still fraught with risk, expense, and obviously time to do these sort of things. And the other thing to think about is, I've seen, and Coinbase did, and you'll see others that are trying to become these alternative trading systems. Those aren't retail platforms, right? Those are institutional platforms. Those are platforms for large block trades, to effectively clear. And the reason that a lot of them exist is because they want to clear large trades without the general market knowing, because those show off market. So in the traditional securities world, Apple Computer could be trading back and forth, but on an ATS, I could go sell, 25 million worth of Apple stock, and it won't necessarily affect the price as it's quoted on NASDAQ, right? That's because it's off the books. So, the solution for a security token for liquidity is, and has to be, either a licensed national securities exchange or an ATS. But the reality is that ATS may not provide access for retail investors. So if you're going to be an ICO issuer and you're issuing a security token, you can't necessarily make the promise that any of these ATSs that are coming on board will, one, ever come on board, because they have to go through the process of becoming a broker-dealer and then file a Form ATS with the SEC. But you can never guarantee that a retail investor would gain access to it. So you kind of go back to what I've opined here before, is that the reality is, with a security token, you're really kind of limited to certain offshore exchanges, because then the SEC sort of opined on that in the Dow token decision. But these offshore exchanges are probably the only venue that you may have for liquidity, right? And so I go back to my point, like with filing a Reg A or an S1 with a security token. Yeah, you have, the ability, the legal ability for resale, right? Meaning that token can be legally resold as opposed to being a restricted security, but you have no market. You actually have less market than you would for one, a share of common stock, and certainly for you, and two, certainly for a utility token. So an ATS is a great concept, and I think there should be more. But the reality is, it doesn't necessarily guarantee access to retail investors, right? And it's definitely plausible that you could start one, and there's procedures for that, and I'm happy to discuss that. But with anybody who's interested, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your security token is going to have liquidity when these start coming on board. Which, again, I think with most ICOs, the value, if anything, was the liquidity, right? And if you took an ICO or an STO, a security token offering, and you took a share of stock, a stock offering, and they were the exact same deal, right? And this is just today. If they were the exact same deal, promising the exact same returns, one was selling a restricted share of stock, one was selling a restricted security token. In almost every instance, I would advise my clients, at least, to purchase the share of stock, because at least the share of stock has some exit mechanism, right? You can do an IPO, could list on one of multiple securities exchanges, whereas the security token right now doesn't have that exit. So it's actually more liquid than the share of stock, and that sort of goes against what I think has been driving, to a large degree, these ICOs for now about 2 years. So it's an interesting thing to consider if you're going down the security token road. Not to say that, one, you shouldn't necessarily go down that road or do it in the United States. You could always do it offshore. And two, or three rather, you have to consider what the implications of selling what's a liquid security really is, and how that affects valuation, how that affects your ability to sort of sell your offering out, right? So if you have any questions, on forming ATSs, broker-dealer formation, or security token offerings, hit me up, Adam Tracy. I'm at bitcoin-lawyer.org. Emails at the bottom of this video. Great talking to you, and I will see you soon.